Just 10 minutes ago, I had won a case. Now I'm in handcuffs. When did I become the suspect? Danielle Moore, a young black attorney, stood on the courthouse steps under the scorching afternoon sun. Still wearing her black robe, she clutched a stack of case files under one arm, waiting for her friend. The street was quiet, the day warm, and for a moment, everything felt calm. She had just walked out of a courtroom victorious. That's when a police car slowed down and stopped in front of her. The officer in the passenger seat rolled down the window and called out, "Ma'am, what are you doing here? You look suspicious. Just standing around." Danielle glanced down at her robe, puzzled, but polite. "I'm a licensed attorney. Just finished court, waiting for a friend." The officer stepped out. The driver followed suit. Both were white. Their stares were sharp, their tone dismissive. One crossed his arms. "Is that some kind of costume? Trying to draw attention or something?" Danielle exhaled slowly. "Number, this is an official robe. My ID is in my bag. We'll need to see that." Slowly. Any sudden moves can be concerning. The moment she reached for her bag, one officer grabbed her arm tightly. Pedestrians nearby began to stop and watch. Phones were pulled out. Cameras started recording. "You're being detained for questioning. We'll need you to come down to the station for identification." "What? On what grounds?" "Suspicious behavior. You match a description." "Security protocol." Danielle pulled back, her voice shaky. "Is it the robe? I told you I'm an attorney." "Quiet. Follow instructions." From the crowd, someone shouted, "She's a lawyer! Do you even know who you're arresting?" But it was already happening. Tears welled up in Danielle's eyes as she was pushed to the ground. Her hands were cuffed behind her back while her robe still clung to her shoulders. As they dragged her down the courthouse stairs toward the police car, the flash of camera phones followed. Another nameless video was about to explode across the internet. Another face of injustice. Danielle was sitting handcuffed in the back of the patrol car. The handcuffs were tightened very tightly by the cops, as if they wanted her to be hurt more. Her robe, hanging down to his knees. He looked out the dusty windows. He held his breath steady, but the same thought kept echoing in his mind. "I told them I was a lawyer. Why wasn't that enough? What more do I have to do to prove it to you?" Officer Foster stared at him in the rearview mirror. "So what if you're a lawyer? Just because you're black doesn't make you innocent. You're guilty by nature." The other officer, Tate, snickered. "We've seen a lot of criminal lawyers, especially ones like you." One of them stepped on the gas and the car jerked. The brakes. Danielle's head hit the windshield. Foster turned sharply. "You'd better behave yourself at the station, or you're gonna spend the night rights." Danielle remained silent, because deep down she knew the voice wouldn't have mattered. Her bag was thrown on the ground at the police station. His ID card, the bar card, and court files were carelessly thrown on the table. Tate took it, took a piece of paper, and looked at it sarcastically. "Are these real, or do you print them at home?" Danielle clenched her jaw. "I'm a lawyer. I deserve everything you see. This is intimidation." Foster leaned in with a grin. "Looks like someone's used to special treatment. This is not a court. Get out. It's a different game here. That robe won't save you." Danielle took a deep breath. "I want to talk to my lawyer." Tate grinned. "Which one?" They laughed and slammed the door in her face. Now she was alone, in a cold, bare room, a pounding in her skull, bruises forming on her wrists. But heavier than all of that was the shame. Shame for believing in a system that never believed in her. Danielle, once a woman who delivered justice through the law, now sat alone in the cold grip of the very system she had trusted. She had been confined for hours in a windowless interrogation room with gray concrete walls. There was no clock, no way to tell how long she'd been there. The floor was damp. A single metal chair and a rusted table occupied the room. Her wrists still burned from the handcuffs. Sweat clung to her brow, now turning cold. The door creaked open. Officer Tate entered with a stack of papers and sat across from her, as if nothing had happened. "We've got some records here," he said calmly. "The defendant you represented last week, he was in a street fight recently. He's black too, just like you." Danielle didn't even lift her eyes. "My job was to defend him. What he does beyond that isn't my concern." Officer Foster entered next, flipping a chair backward and straddling it with arrogant ease. His voice oozed condescension. "Your job, huh? Funny word. From out here, it just looks like you all protect each other." Danielle slowly raised her head. "Number. You see us from the outside, never from within." Foster shrugged. "We're the ones who keep this city safe. Wearing a robe doesn't put you above questioning, especially not someone like you." Silence fell. Danielle inhaled slowly. "And what exactly does someone like me mean?" Tate rolled his eyes. "You know damn well what it means." Danielle clasped her hands in front of her. Her voice was steady. "In those courtrooms, I don't just defend my clients. I'd defend this country's belief in justice. And now, that belief has turned its back on me. Foster stood and leaned across the table. Belief won't save you in here. Power does. And we've got that. Don't forget it. They slammed the door behind them. Danielle was left alone. The weak light above her cast a long shadow onto the floor. She stared at the wall in front of her. Slowly, her head bowed. And then, a quiet voice echoed in her mind. Where there is no power, patience becomes resistance. The interrogation never resumed, because the answers were already clear. They didn't need Danielle to be guilty. Her blackness was enough. But Danielle wasn't the kind to be silenced. She was waiting, because justice, in its truest form, grows loudest in silence. As the heavy doors of the justice hall creaked open, the silence inside felt like a tomb. Danielle Moore was no longer a defense attorney. She now sat in the defendant's chair, labeled a suspect. She wore a plain gray prison uniform. Her robe had been stripped away, but her posture remained firm, her gaze locked onto the sculpted scales of justice high above the courtroom. When Judge Ronald Beckett entered, the atmosphere shifted. In his 60s, white-skinned with cold eyes, he scanned the courtroom with the air of unshakable authority. He glanced at Danielle, then flipped through the case file with disinterest. "Says here you're a member of the bar," he muttered with condescension. "But today, you're standing before me as a defendant. Quite the turn of events, isn't it?" A soft murmur rippled through the room. Danielle's defense attorney quickly stood. "Your Honor, my client was detained in a public space without any legal cause. She presented her ID and bar card, yet was subjected to force by officers despite identifying herself as an attorney." Judge Beckett removed his glasses, squinting with disdain. "Let's not bring racial profiling slogans into my courtroom. This is not a stage for social media theatrics." Danielle rose to her feet, her eyes locked with his. "I was simply waiting for a friend, still wearing my robe, but my skin color, to them, outweighed my degree. I didn't commit a crime. I was targeted because I'm black." The judge slammed his pen down. "That's enough. I will not allow identity politics in my courtroom. This is a court of law, not a street protest." In the back row, Danielle's mother sat silently. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She clutched her shawl tightly, her gaze fixed on her daughter's face. Cameras flashed. The media had taken their positions, but no one was paying attention to the lenses anymore. Every eye was now fixed on Beckett's rage and Danielle's unshakable resolve. Danielle stepped forward. "I'm not just speaking for myself. I speak for the countless others who face the same injustice. You may choose not to see us, but we're here, and I will not be silenced today." Judge Beckett's face flushed red. The fury he tried to conceal beneath his judicial authority now spilled into every tightened feature of his face. The presiding judge banged the gavel. "That's enough. This hearing will proceed." But something had already begun, something that could no longer be stopped. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Danielle's voice didn't just echo through the courtroom. It rang out in the hearts of millions watching from their screens. On the second day of the trial, the courtroom's atmosphere was completely transformed. Every seat was filled. Reporters, civil rights advocates, and activists had arrived early to witness history unfold. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled. Signs were raised high. Chants echoed through the streets. When a lawyer is silenced, justice goes quiet. This time, Danielle walked into the courtroom not in a prison jumpsuit, but in her attorney's robe. Under pressure from public outcry and the viral storm online, the court had permitted her to wear her professional attire. But the true shift wasn't in what she wore, it was in perception. Her defense attorney began his statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the woman standing before you is not just an attorney. She is justice personified. She is innocent. And what's truly on trial here today is the system itself." Footage played across the courtroom monitors. Officers surrounding Danielle without cause, pushing her to the ground while she wore her robe, mocking her identity and credentials. Her bar ID being tossed onto the table like trash. Jurors exchanged glances. Some turned their faces away. Some trembled. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It had become a moment of reckoning. Judge Ronald Beckett adjusted his glasses and opened the file. A long silence passed before he finally spoke. His voice was quieter now, whether softened by fatigue or reflection. "This court finds that Danielle Moore committed no crime, and that her detention lacked any legal foundation." A wave of restrained applause rippled through the courtroom. But what followed stunned everyone. The judge continued. "An internal investigation is hereby ordered into the conduct of Officers Tate and Foster. Additionally, the department's protocols are to be re-examined for violations." Then came the final blow. And this court formally requests a review by the Ethics Committee of any actions that may have compromised its impartiality. In that moment, it wasn't just a case that ended. A wall had cracked. Outside the courthouse, Danielle stood before the sea of supporters. Microphones were shoved toward her. Flashbulbs popped. She raised her hand, her eyes locked on the nearest camera lens. Her voice didn't shake. It was sharp, unapologetic. I didn't speak today just for myself. I spoke for everyone who's ever been silenced. When they arrested me, they said, "You think you're more important than you are." She narrowed her eyes. Well, maybe it's time we all remembered how important we actually are. This isn't an end, it's a beginning. If not me today, it would have been someone else tomorrow, but not anymore. The crowd erupted in applause. People wept. Some chanted her name, others simply nodded, silently moved. When justice goes quiet, those who refuse to be silenced shape history.